Hi everyone, this is an overview of the Medical Physics Holistic Review Workbook. This workbook is designed to help your program develop a holistic review approach for residency recruitment. We'll be navigating through the steps with the tabs at the bottom of the screen. Tab 1, Preparation. This section covers essential pre-work exercises for establishing a foundation for your holistic review and recruitment process. Follow the circled numbers 1 through 6 on this sheet and follow the written directions to fill out the yellow fields. First, begin by adding the mission of your institution or department. Second, fill in the mission and goals of your specific residency program. Consider, for example, what unique characteristics and strengths distinguish your program. Third, copy and paste the text used to describe your program or residency position on your institutional website, your program website, and the residency application system. Review these and evaluate whether your messaging is consistent with the institutional and program goals entered for the first 2 prompts, as well as whether the descriptions are consistent across your postings. Before you continue, think through whether any of the information you've entered needs to be updated for consistency or to better reflect the mission and goals of your program and institution. Next, move on to the 4th prompt on this sheet. List out the characteristics you value in your residents. Think about the personal and professional characteristics that have yielded successful residents in the past, as well as what skills, experiences, or attributes align with your program's goals and would enhance your program, department, or clinic. For example, what characteristics would you want to see in a good medical physicist and healthcare team member? For the final step 5, review each characteristic on your list. Enter in how you would define and evaluate it, as well as whether this characteristic supports and contributes value to the mission and goals of your institution or residency program. Reflect on what you've entered and consider whether any adjustments need to be made to ensure cohesiveness across your responses to all the prompts on this sheet. Tabs 2A through 2D. Applicant Criteria Identification and Prioritization. In the next 4 tabs, 2A through 2D, you'll be identifying your applicant selection criteria using the EACM model to categorize your criteria under 2A, Experiences, 2B, Attributes, 2C, Competencies, and 2D, Metrics. Each tab provides a description of its respective EACM category and provides some examples on the upper right. Under Criteria, use the drop-down to select a characteristic you previously listed in the Preparation tab. You can also refine the criteria description you've selected by editing the text or type in entirely new criteria. Duplicate criteria within any of these tabs will be highlighted. Under the Importance column, rank each criterion's importance for your selection process. Very important for criteria that are essential to the role, important for criteria that may not be critical but significantly impact candidate suitability, somewhat important for criteria that may enhance candidate suitability but are not decisive, and not important for criteria that hold little relevance to the selection process for this role. Next, identify whether each criterion is a hard requirement. A hard requirement describes criteria where an applicant will not proceed to the next step of recruitment if they do not meet the criteria. Finally, select the stages where each criterion will be evaluated: application review, screening interview, and/or full interview. You should have at least 1 stage selected for each criterion. Tab 3, Final Selection Criteria. This tab provides a comprehensive overview of the selection criteria that will guide your evaluation through developing the rest of the holistic review and interview process. This comprehensive overview can also help ensure that all team members involved are aligned on recruitment goals, which facilitates a more efficient and effective selection process. This sheet automatically populates with the criteria you've marked as very important, important, or somewhat important in the EACM tabs, sorted by level of importance. Any criteria that were marked as not important in tab 2 will not appear here, allowing you to focus only on the relevant factors that will contribute to successful hiring decisions. Whether these criteria were marked as hard requirements, meaning that an application will not proceed to the next step without meeting these criteria, is also shown for your reference along with the stages at which you'll be evaluating each criterion. Review the list to ensure you've included all your criteria and that all your selections make sense. This is your final list that will be used for the next 3 stages: application review, screening interview, and full interview. If changes are needed, go back and edit the criteria in the EACM tabs 2A through D. The following tabs will be populated based on what you see in this sheet, so this list must be finalized before you proceed onto the next steps. Tab 4, Application Review. Before you proceed with tabs 4 through 6, please make sure that you've reviewed and finalized all your criteria, their importance level, and their evaluation stages in tab 3. The criteria you've selected for evaluation during application review will automatically populate on this sheet sorted by level of importance. Whether the criteria were marked as hard requirements is also shown for your reference. Scroll right to create an anchored rubric for each of the criteria you are evaluating at this stage. Anchored rubrics provide clear and detailed descriptions of different performance levels for each of your evaluation criteria. They are referred to as anchored because assessment scores are tied to these specific standards. For each criterion listed, use the fields on the right to describe the standards that would constitute performance at different levels. The table below is set up to allow up to 5 anchors for each criterion, but you can describe as many or as few as appropriate for the criteria you are evaluating. The next 2 tabs, 5 and 6, will allow you to select interview questions and develop your anchored rubrics for those questions. So first we'll skip ahead a few tabs to tab 7, Question Bank. This tab will be used for adding questions you can select for both the screening and full interviews. You can add as many questions as you like for the selection criteria you've described as being very important, important, or somewhat important. You won't have to use all the questions entered, but you will want to make sure you have at least 1 question for every criterion you've elected to evaluate during the interviews. To add questions, navigate to the next available row and use the drop-down menu under Criteria category to select the criteria you would like to write a question for. Then, under Interview Question, enter in an interview question that evaluates the selection criteria. You can refer to the next tab, Example Question Bank, for example questions that evaluate different characteristics. You'll now be able to select these questions in tabs 5 and 6. Tab 5, Screening Interview. The criteria you've selected for evaluation during the screening interview will automatically populate in the screening interview criteria checklist on this sheet. Scroll right to select up to 10 questions you'd like to ask during the screening interview. First, select one of your criteria in the table below. You will only be able to select criteria that have been indicated for evaluation during the screening interview stage. Next, select a question for each criterion. Questions are criteria specific and must be entered in tab 7, Question Bank. Duplicate questions within either of the interview tabs will be highlighted. If you need more questions, go ahead and navigate back to the question bank on tab 7 and add questions there. Once they're added, you'll be able to select them. After adding criteria and questions, you can scroll left back to the interview criteria checklist to check on your progress. Under Questions Added, you'll see an icon that lets you know whether you've added questions for the criteria on your list. A red X indicates that the criterion hasn't been added to the interview question list yet. A yellow triangle indicates that the criteria has been selected in the interview question list, but a question for the criteria hasn't been selected yet. A green check indicates that the criterion has been added to the interview question list with questions selected. After selecting all your screening interview questions, scroll right again to create your anchored rubric for evaluating responses to each question. Tab 6, Full Interview. This tab functions the same way as the screening interview tab, only now you'll be doing the same for your full interview. The criteria you've selected for evaluation during the full interview will automatically populate in the full interview criteria checklist on this sheet. Scroll right to select up to 30 questions you'd like to ask during the full interview. You will only be able to select criteria that have been indicated for evaluation during the full interview stage. The same criterion can be selected more than once if you would like to ask multiple questions evaluating it. Next, select a question for each criterion. Questions are criteria specific and must be entered in Tab 7 Question Bank. Duplicate questions within either of the interview tabs will be highlighted. If you need more questions, go ahead and navigate back to the question bank on Tab 7 and add questions there. Once they're added, you'll be able to select them. After adding criteria and questions, you can scroll left back to the interview criteria checklist to check on your progress. Under Questions Added, you'll see an icon that lets you know whether you've added questions for the criteria on your list. A red X indicates that the criterion hasn't been added to the interview question list yet. A yellow triangle indicates that the criteria has been selected in the interview question list, but a question for the criteria hasn't been selected yet. A green check indicates that the criterion has been added to the interview question list with questions selected. After selecting all your screening interview questions, scroll right again to create your anchored rubric for evaluating responses to each question. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Medical Physics Holistic Review Workbook. By using Holistic Review to align your hiring practices and selection criteria with your institutional mission, you can develop a more effective interview process that reflects your institutional values and supports your program's goals. And we hope that this workbook helps you achieve this for your program.